Good morning. I am Sara Schwarzbaum. I am the founder of Couples Counseling Associates, and I'm also the founder of the Academy for Couples Therapists. I do these Facebook Live case consultations approximately once every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks, but today I'm going to do a presentation. It will be about a half-hour presentation in lieu of a case consultation. This is an abbreviated version of a 2-hour presentation, but I'll talk for about a half hour about why are intimate relationships so difficult and make some cultural and gender considerations. I think that for some of you, this may be very helpful in your work with couples. So I am showing you a handout so that you can follow along with the presentation, and at the end, of the, as I said, approximately 20 to 25 minutes, I will be taking some questions that you can put in the chat. So, like I said, I want to describe some uniquely American cultural underpinnings of relationship distress. And I will talk a bit about what counselors can do, even when they don't work with couples, to avoid destabilizing a relationship. Much of what I say applies to both heterosexual and same-sex relationships, but for same-sex relationships, there are additional challenges. Obviously, there's many other interpersonal factors and individual factors that put a relationship at risk. And many times relationships are at risk because of those interpersonal and individual factors. But I think that some of what's going on is of a different nature. I think that when partners are unhappy and they feel like they deserve better, there is something else at play. Most couples start out highly satisfied with their relationship, but as time goes by and disagreements appear, people get disappointed, and that initiates a downward spiral from which they often struggle to recover. They lose commitment to working things out, and unintentionally, sometimes individual or couples counseling can often destabilize a relationship. So let me start by addressing some cultural underpinnings of relationship distress. I'm going to be talking about a few items. The first one I want to talk about is that equality is difficult to achieve. Now, we know that during the last 50 years, the US has seen a revolution in the history of marriage. So this is the first time in history where couples are attempting to create an intimate relationship that is not based on a hierarchy or of one person dominating another. However, most individual relationships are hierarchical. So the student-teacher, the parent-child, the employer-employee. So we don't have a whole lot of role models for constructing an equal relationship. Now, additionally, even though we've had a revolution in the history of marriage, family practices and social policies are not changing fast enough to provide the infrastructure needed for this evolution. So I'm just going to ask you to consider two small items here. There's a lot more. One is a school policy. School policies are still the same way they were 100 years ago, with school starting at a certain time and ending at a certain time, even though two parents are working outside of the home and there's no way they can be done by 2:30 in the afternoon. So the school policies don't work for the current family. And then there are family-friendly policies that simply don't exist in some cultures, and in particular in the US. So policymakers are still debating whether to make preschool mandatory, whether to cover birth control, whether to have paid family leave, and for how long, and whether to license or whether to subsidy daycare centers, and many more. Some states are better at this than others, but in general, we don't have good policies that support the the changes that have occurred in the family, and that puts additional stress in the nuclear, in the nuclear family. So the second point I want to make is that there are anti-relational forces in our culture. When the honeymoon period begins to wane and the differences appear, there is a sense that there are other alternatives available, and that makes for an erosion of commitment. This is the first time in history when the survival of the family rests on the individual happiness of the members of the couple. So this possibility of multiple alternatives creates the illusion that there's someone else out there that could be a better fit, not to mention all the online dating sites. But as I said, this illusion erodes commitment if we're constantly looking over our shoulders, over our partner's shoulders to see who else is out there. There's less energy to invest in the relationship. The second anti-relational force in our culture is that I want to mention is that there is a cultural belief that, quote, we have to get our needs met, unquote. And if our needs are not met, we want to bail out of the relationship, not realizing, A, that we play a role in meeting our needs, and B, that we play a role in meeting the needs of our partners, and C, that those are things that are very difficult to balance. So of course, our needs are not going to be met often, and neither are the needs of our partners. And so even in relationships that are working well, so it's how we deal with that balance that makes a difference in terms of relationship distress. But if we believe that our needs need to be met, only ours and not our partners, it's going to be some problem. So there are more anti-relational forces in our culture, but I want to move on to cultural relationship myth that is related to the anti-relational forces, but is a separate issue. So one relationship myth is that marriage is a 50-50 proposition. And in fact, the opposite is true. The Gottmans in their research found that the best marriages are the ones in which partner A is invested in partners B's interest as opposed to their own. It appears that negotiating from a position of pure self-interest doesn't work. The happiest couples give without expecting in return because they can rely on their partners to operate with their best interest in mind. Another myth is that high conflict, disappointments, and disagreements don't exist in happy relationships. This cannot be further from the truth. Disagreements are a problem only when negativity is escalated as opposed to matched. So again, negativity is not a problem. This is another finding of the Gottman's research team. And disappointments are a problem only when people think they're not supposed to have them, and they don't learn how to self-regulate, how to negotiate for a win-win, etc. So the last thing I'm going to say about this is that, and this is connected to the cultural problems and the relationship myth, that the culture doesn't provide, as I said, models, romance novels and movies, and with the wedding and never after. So not only do we not have role models in our life, but we also don't have role models in the culture about how a relationship functions. The fourth issue I want to talk about is that isolation begets high expectations. So again, this is something that has a lot to do with what's happening in the culture. We lost the extended family networks and we increased our geographic mobility. And that results in fewer and fewer relationships, as I said, with high expectations and the loss of modeling. But with the loss of the tribe, we put all the proverbial eggs in one basket, increasing the burden on each person. So we expect our partners to be our best friends, our best providers, our best lovers. We depend on our partners for much of our relationship fixes. And in reality, one person alone cannot possibly fulfill all our needs for connection, belonging, and affiliation. The other consequence of losing the frequent contact with the extended family networks is that we lost access, as I said, to models of how to deal with people who are disappointing us, who lose their temper, we don't see anybody negotiating for a win-win. Again, I'm not advocating for the return of a patriarchal cultural model of gender oppression and lack of differentiation when everybody knew your business. But the reality is that we don't have role models for how a successful relationship operates. And finally, in terms of the isolation, we lost the additional hands when we lost the tribe and the extended family networks. We lost the hands to help raise the children and take care of the household. Again, I don't have any romantic ideas about how the past was better or anything like that. It's just that we have to understand what we lost when we lost the extended family networks and the toll it places on the isolated nuclear family. It's an impossible job for one nuclear family alone. The fifth issue I want to talk about in terms of cultural underpinnings for relationship distress is that high conflict and narcissistic personalities are on the rise in modern urban societies. This is also the result of the extended family networks, among other reasons. So it is now possible to live alone. This is the first time in the history of humankind that individuals don't, quote, need, unquote, others in order to survive. And so we don't depend on anyone. We can live without depending on anyone, or so we think. And we can live without caring for anyone. So lacking exposure to interdependence increases fears, anxiety, rigidity, lack of adaptation, and self-centeredness. I'm going to talk about two more issues. One is economic stress and time famine. So when there's economic stress and time famine, people tend to blame each other. Some of the reasons are that in the US, we lack both access to cheap labor and rational government policies to help families, which perpetuates a hyper do-it-yourself cultural mindset that increases pressures on the families. There's no way to complete all the tasks that are needed to be completed in a given week. And there's either no money or no desire to hire help. And like I said, people tend to be blaming each other when there's no money or time. So this is why I call it, this is why I say that couples today are exposed to severe either economic stress or severe time famine or both. The last point I want to make is that we often hear about gender role shifts, about gender expectations, about gender role confusion. And these are very complicated issues to be talking about. I'm going to try to be somewhat brief in my comments about the gender issues, but I don't think we can talk about couples distress without addressing gender. So much of our culture has changed because of the gender shifts. And when we think of differences between genders, there are sort of two mindsets. We are, either men are women, and women are seen as not that different from each other, or they're seen as so different that that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Well, what we know from multicultural theory is that we have to take into account both the differences between groups and the differences within groups. And so men and women are both the same, and they're also different. So when we think of it that way, we can incorporate some more flexibility and some more ambiguity into our thinking. Focusing only on differences encourages stereotyping. This is when you have people in the room who say women are too emotional, or people who say men are too distant and too withdrawn, and etc. But so let's talk about the piece about men and women that is the same. So as it turns out, some men are just as much in touch with their emotions as women are. And some women are not in touch with their emotions and cannot express vulnerability, or don't know how to express negativity well. So there may be more similarities than the culture at large generally believes. And it's a question of dealing with the individual person and how they deal with their negative emotions, not necessarily to think that women know how to express them and men don't. That is not true. On the other hand, the majority of divorces are initiated by women. The majority of complaints are initiated by women. Women tend not to want to, they're insisting on emotional connection since they're not dependent financially anymore, as they used to be, on men. And so one of the reasons for the spike in divorce rates since the 70s is that fact. And so, as Terry Real says, women have changed a lot, but many men are still culturally unprepared for this change, and continue to feel pressure to be or appear to be strong and competitive. And this can make them seem arrogant, emotionally distant, and unaware of their own feelings or the feelings of others, and contemptuous of vulnerability. And he also says, Terry Real, that is, quote, "Men are not afraid of intimacy, they are afraid of dominance," unquote. Now, for women, the gender role shifts have created other, no less difficult challenges. Many women are eager to fix their men, and they're intent on playing the role of men's best self-improvement program. In heterosexual relationships, when women get overly critical, the cascade of criticism and defensiveness leading to contempt or withdrawal that John Gottman so aptly describes can become solidified. So, as I said, 80% of complaints in relationships are initiated by women, but they tend to do, as Gottman describes it, the harsh startup. And they complain that men complain only after women complain because they don't bring up their complaint. So there's some truth to that differences. And this just shows how difficult the relationship negotiation, collaboration, and compromising for a win-win can be. So there's obviously a lot more to talk about in terms of gender role shifts and gender role expectations, but I'm going to stop here because I need to tell you a little bit about how individual counseling can put a relationship at risk and destabilize a couple, and then a few things about what can be done. So as I said, individual counselors can and often do destabilize a couple, and the same is true for ineffective couples therapy. Even when counselors don't overly take their client's side, they may not know how clients react and only hear what clients' partners do wrong. And here are some things that individual counselors hear. He will not help with the children. The mental load is all on me. She will not have sex. She used to want to, and now she doesn't. He doesn't support my career goals. I don't feel supported. He yells and calls me names. She's high maintenance. She's so emotional. He's so self-absorbed. I believe he's a narcissist. So one or both partners can appear severely mentally ill if you believe the descriptions of the individual members of the couple. The reality is that partners trigger each other, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish between symptoms of borderline personality disorder or a person in attachment panic triggered by one of the partner's withdrawals. So the second comment I want to make about individual counseling is that because what I just described, individual counseling can encourage and perpetuate negativity. Sometimes it's just a matter of negative bias, since some clients believe that the partner's offenses are worse than their own, as Brent Atkinson describes. It is understandable that the counselor will have increased compassion for the client and decreased compassion for the client's partner. However, the more compassion and empathy the counselor has for the client, the less accountable the client becomes to their own offenses, defenses, or dysfunctional protective strategies. And finally, individual counseling can be a form of triangulation. Again, given the first 2 points I just made, the more energy the client puts into disparaging his or her partner, the less energy he or she will put into figuring things out directly with the partner. This can negatively impact the couple, since clients could perceive they have an ally in their counselor against their partner, like they have it with their friends or their relatives. So what can therapists do? The first thing I'm going to say is educate your clients. Consider, let's see, what am I saying? Yeah, there it is. So consider explaining some of these cultural underpinnings of relationship distress to your clients. You want to educate them. This reduces shame and the feeling that I'm the only one dealing with this issue. Again, because of the isolation of the nuclear family, most couples believe that they're the only ones that are struggling in the way that they do. And so one of the things we need to do as therapists is to reduce shame and the feeling that we're in this alone. And when you educate them, that actually reduces shame. You can have them read articles. You can explain some of what you hear today. You can have them watch videos. You can have a conversation about what it means to be relational. You can show them videos of teamwork. You can show them problem-solving videos. Ellen Bader and Pete Pearson have some good ones in their Couples Institute site. Esther Perel videos are really good. The Secret of Desire and Long-Term Relationship, for example. I've shown this to many of my clients, and their shame about having so many relationship issues decreases. The second thing I'm going to talk about is you can help your clients expand their repertoire so that they can see their contributions. Many clients say, I have tried everything. This means they've tried everything under their own repertoire of behaviors, under their own defense strategies. Trying something really new will be uncomfortable, difficult, and confusing. Anybody working with, let's say, codependents and alcoholics will know how confusing and difficult once they begin to make the shift is. And so this is true of everybody, not just codependents. You could also invite a partner to a session if you're feeling increased compassion for your client, and if you're feeling decreased compassion for your client's partner. So if you're the individual counselor, you can lose empathy for your client's partner. So when you see your clients interacting, that provides you with more data. And when each individual counselor has, when each individual client has their own individual counselor, that actually increases the negative bias. And that increases the destabilization possibilities for the couple. If you're the couple's therapist, make sure you have ample and frequent access to the individual therapist so that you can collaborate. You not only need to hear from them, but more importantly, you need to share with them what you observe. I usually have two signature releases to share information on both of my clients to one individual therapist. I want to go back to the number 2, that you want to help your clients expand their repertoire and see their contributions. I think you could educate your clients on the systemic interactional patterns issue, because again, that decreases shame and that increases their awareness of their contribution and makes them more accountable. You can tell them that they have a responsibility to get what they want, and you can explore alternatives when they say, I have tried everything. This generally is not true. Obviously, you can encourage them to have, experienced and effective couples therapists. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is you want to help them get some mentoring or do some interviews of couples that are successful to find out how they do it. Again, given everything I've talked about, the lack of models, the lack of exposure, the lack of the tribe, and the isolation makes couples not know how a successful relationship becomes like that. And so I do a lot of work with my couples on helping them interview other couples who are successful that they look up to find out how they do it. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I know that it's been a half hour, but I haven't talked yet about having the gender-centric conversations. So I'm going to go through these questions really quickly just to show you that there are gender-centric conversations and interventions you can have, and that deal with gender socialization patterns, gender role expectations, gender role confusion. And this is about placing gender at the center of the relationship. In fact, heterosexual relationships can learn a lot from same-sex relationships, and you can look at that research about how same-sex relationships sometimes negotiate better because they don't have the gender role expectations than that heterosexual relationship sometimes have. So some of these questions to place gender at the center of the therapeutic conversation can be, what does it mean to be a man or a woman in today's culture? How does a relationship encourage one partner to be more stressed than the other? Who benefits by a relationship, by a particular relationship pattern? How are decisions made about how to spend money on, when to have sex, where to live? How do experiences differ when viewed through the other gender's eye? How is a particular response related to being male or female? And then you can go back to the family of origin. Who was closer to whom growing up? Is this the kind of relationship they want to recreate with their own children? How has being a man or a woman changed in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their lives? And what changes did they make as a result of that, or didn't? Or what changes do they want to make as a result of that, but haven't yet? I already mentioned, but it's always worth mentioning again. Questions about money. Who earns what? What does each think about whose money it is? What role does it play in the wife's decision to stay in the relationship? What role does it play in the freedom a husband feels to spend or veto spending? So you could, or questions about sex. How do you initiate sex or requests for affection? How is that related to being male or female? In other words, like I said, you need to be able to put gender at the center of some of the conversations. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask you if you have any questions to put them in the chat. And if I'm going to wait a few minutes, and then if I see some comments, I will try to answer them. And if I don't, we will be done, and I will give you a new date for either a presentation or a live couples therapy consultation. So I'm just going to wait a few minutes. As I said, I am the founder of Couples Counseling Associates, and also the Academy for Couples Therapists, which is an online training site for therapists who want to become better at doing couples therapy. I will just wait a couple more minutes. I'm just going to wait a few minutes. As I said, I am the founder of Couples Counseling. So this will be available as a replay if you have not been able to see it live. And I think I'm going to sign off and hope to see you soon in February. Thank you.